This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Finance Committee meeting for February 28th. It's 5:30. Before we do anything else, Councilor Trail, I saw your minutes. They look great. So I'd entertain a motion to approve those.
So moved.
Second. Motion a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great. So we have a pretty, this is probably one of our only finance meetings where we don't have a bunch of appropriations, but there's two items. Well, there's really one thing that we keep not talking about because we talked for a while about appropriations and then we're tired. So I thought this would be as good of a time as any to discuss it. And that is salaries for elected and appointed officials. And then once we've got that, I know we didn't really have a chance to discuss Hadel's quarterly report when she submitted it. So I don't know if there's any thoughts that either of you have had, but if there's anything else that we want to discuss about that at the end of that discussion, before then we can do that. And if not, we can adjourn. For JT, for your benefit, since this is your first term, you may already be familiar with this whole thing, but if not, and for the benefit of anyone in the public who might see this later, we can't vote, obviously, on our own salaries. So what we can do is say, what do we think the salaries of councilors, school committee, mayor, and various appointed positions should be for the next term starting in 2 years. But it has to be us who makes that
kind of like it was done 2 years ago for the bump up this year.
Yes,
councilors pay.
Exactly. And I think there's various ways of looking at this. I think like on one hand, I think that often like we're in a tight situation and discussing these things is difficult to talk about raising our own pay or raising the mayor's pay or anything like that at a place where, there's a lot of other priorities. I think there's just one other way you could look at it though that's sort of worth considering is that a lot of the time when we have these discussions, we're talking about very large increases, and the reason why we are talking about very large increases is because we haven't done it in 10 years or something, and it's gotten to the point where it's just not really a tenable like compensation for the work that's being done. And so I do think that there's something to be considered about just sort of treating that, just acknowledging that inflation happens and that, in terms of just giving people, I mean, I don't think any of us do this for the money, but it does cost us money to do. And the amount, just in terms of, running costs money, obviously, but then also just like, we make commitments here that we can make other commitments. There's jobs that I don't take, right? Because those jobs would require me to work hours that I just don't even apply for those kinds of things. It's like, it does have to some extent like a financial consequence. And then there's also questions about, just how are the current things currently doing? So with that in mind, I just was curious just to start off, has anybody, I did get an email about this from Councilor Zaret, who couldn't be here. So I'll read that into the record. But before that happens, I was just curious if anyone, like, we don't need to come to a broad, decision on anything tonight, but just have you had any thoughts about sort of how you'd like to see this handled in this term?
Could we get another, I know last time, 2 years ago, you did something where you found out what other municipalities had done. Can you provide that for us? Yeah, I'm not ready to say that I would like to see a higher compensation. I'm not I would like to see what other people are doing, and particularly those
Sure.
that are related to us. I think that I don't know what's going to happen in the future with the budget and finances
Yeah.
and things like that. And if we're going to be in a position of potentially, and I'm not saying this is happening, right?
Mhm.
Like, I'm not saying anything. If people have to leave or, jobs are lost, and then we're taking a bump, like I don't feel comfortable with that. And so I think that we need to prioritize our employees
Mhm.
of the city. And that's the sacrifice
Yeah.
that I make for this, right? Because I want to see that the employees of this community are compensated accordingly, and there's no concern about their job security, right? So that's where I'm sitting right now, and I think that those are conversations that we need to have with the two of you, right? Because I'm that comes first to me.
Oh, great. That's true.
No, I agree. I would like to see where we're at comparatively. I have no real point of reference as far, like you noted earlier, as far as doing this or approaching this, but I would like to, if you don't mind, just to see where we stand to similar communities and go from there.
Great. Just one thing I'm just going to throw out, and like, this is something that I'm just going to advocate for, but like, just for whatever it's worth, like, I understand there's like a diversity of opinions on this, and if it's something that the rest of you do or the rest of the council doesn't agree with, like, I'm not going to get all mad about this, but I would like to just have a conversation and explore the concept of parity in compensation between the city council and the school committee. And, I think I had brought this up last time, and sort of, I got a little bit of pushback from some folks on the council who said, well, look, we're responsible for all of these functions and they're responsible for this one department. It's really not the same. And I think they're completely right in saying that, but I also think it's worth saying that if you just look at the last 2 years,
I agree.
The things like people care a lot more about the schools than they do any other city department by far. So the amount of just like the intensity of the way that some people of that work, just think about like everything that those poor people went through last year with all of that stuff. And it just, to me, it's like, I don't know. I just think it's like, again, if I feel one way and everyone else feels another way, like, that's fine. There's plenty of different ways to look at this stuff. And we do need to consider all the budget implications. It's just something I want to bring up every time, because sometimes I talk to the school committee members, and it's like, it's not like they go to basically like a similar number of meetings to us. I mean, they're only on one committee each, but those committees meet pretty often. And I don't know. It's just.
Yeah, I agree. I think I said last year or whenever 2 years ago that I don't agree with hierarchy of compensation.
Mhm.
So I think it's about equity, and I think it's about how we view and respect people's work.
Yeah.
So I think that and that means that two things could be compensated equally.
Right. And then the other thing that I think we should just have a conversation about is, we are going into a mayoral election next year. So, and our mayor has indicated that she's not going to run again. So whatever salary we establish, whether it's the current schedule or any departure from that schedule, will be the salary facing a new mayor. And I do just think there's some, just given the weight of that job, like I'm not saying the pay is too low or the pay is too high or anything like that. I just think it is worth looking at other communities and just generally like the job and being like, is this a reasonable amount to, that's actually, because it's not like what we do, right? Like, that's a full-time job, and whoever takes that job is going to be leaving a job to take it. And we do want to have the person who does that be a person that has a skill set that is attractive to it. So it's just something that I think we should kind of talk about, is just like, how do we feel about that going into this sort of new situation? So that's all. I don't have any strong feelings on that one way or another. It's just when we look at all of that, we should talk about it. So I'm going to read, Councilor Zaret's email, just because we're having this conversation. And so he says, "This is certainly anecdotal, but as you consider salaries for the mayor for next term, I can say unequivocally that I've had many conversations about that office, and one thing that comes up every time is that the salary is a negative influence to anyone considering that position. Anyone considering running to be the chief executive of our municipal corporation will be looking for a salary that is competitive with other administrative salaries in the private sector. Additionally, in order to continue to attract qualified and diverse candidates, I feel like the mayor's salary needs to be increased. I am proposing that the committee consider 120,000. Furthermore, I continue to feel that we missed the mark in our recent round of council salaries. The time involved between meetings, stakeholder engagement, and constituent service is significant. Obviously, some sort of study would be helpful, but we don't have the capacity for that. I propose 7,500 per councillor per year. As for school committee, I was always happy to support the thoughts of my colleagues there, but I leave it them to advocate for that. So that's what he said about that, just if we're just considering how various people have weighed in. So,
what's the mayor's salary now? I understand he's proposing 120. What is it?
I wish I'd printed out. You really should have it in front of it.
Yes. I don't know why I showed up without it. So my bad. Oh, Lindsay's first. Yes, Lindsay, you probably know this.
Yeah, just to chime in on this, it went up to 87,000 for this year, and then for FY25 it jumps to 89. So since we split up the payments into 26 weeks each, for FY25 it actually ends up being 88,000 because the full amount doesn't take effect until the following fiscal year.
Right. And thank you, Lindsay. That's really helpful. And just for context, there a few years back there was I think it was 2020 or 2021. There was a discussion about raising the mayoral salary up to I think 90, and I think we voted to eventually do that, but to do it in like over like a 5 or 6 year period. And of course, since then, inflation has increased quite substantially. So, I do think it's something where I don't think it's necessarily realistic that we're going to be able to have a salary that competes with private sector compensation per se, but I do think we do need to be cognizant of if somebody's going to be taking a pay cut, what are we actually talking about here? So I think it's something that's that I think we can keep talking about as time goes on. But that's sort of all I've got. I would love to get some information about sort of comparable communities. I would just say that when we start looking at those communities, one thing that I've stressed in the past is that there's a little bit of trickiness around comparing them because on one hand, so we look at Northampton, right? And some of the salaries are quite a bit higher. And people say, well, Northampton has a lot more people. And that's true. But at the same time, I think sort of this, I don't know that the duties involved are actually substantially, that's sort of the thing is if you're, in some bigger cities, you might even have a chief of staff where our mayor doesn't. But I also just think that there's, if you have the mayor of say Chicopee, that's a little less than 4 times the size of Easthampton, but they have a police department and a fire department, and they have to put out a budget every year, and they have to a lot of the duties are fundamentally the same. Now, having more people, they have more money to spend, so there's a question about that. But I just think that I don't think it's necessarily true that if a city is 4 times bigger, then their salary should be 4 times bigger. I don't think it scales perfectly like that. The reality, we might be a small community, but that doesn't mean that the job is necessarily a quarter as hard, you know? So I just think that that's something that we should just sort of keep in mind as we approach all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I can put out a survey to the City Clerks Association and other communities that I know that are towns but have city forms of government.
Mhm.
Some of them have administrators, not mayors, but, you know, we can see what comes back.
Right.
We have this way of doing, you know, a form, a Google survey thing that makes it pretty quick and easy to
Right.
do. So hopefully we'd be able to get some good feedback on that. I think also you have to think about, you know, I'm going to hear from Eastern Mass, and
Right.
you really cannot compare Central Mass and Eastern Mass to Western Mass. You just can't. If we did, I'd be making a whole lot more money.
Yeah, we don't have $1 million.
But it would be, you know, whatever comes back, it's still all good information.
Mhm.
And I can ask about school committee, I can ask about mayor, I can see if other mayors go up a graduated, you know, how that all works. And I'd also, I'm gonna throw this on us since I have the floor.
Mhm.
I'd also like you to consider the clerks of the council pay, because the same thing had happened with that pay, was it was really low, and then it, you know, if that could also be part of the every 2-year discussion, so it doesn't look like a huge increase, you know, that kind of thing. So that's like an appointed position to
Right.
consider. But I'd be glad to do that other survey for the school.
When you put it together, you did a great job, and I can't remember how it was organized, but can you do like Western Mass clumped together?
Yeah, I can do
and-
by county.
Yeah,
I can
okay.
do population, and
Yeah.
we'll see what we get back.
Yeah.
But
that'd be-
the way this survey thing, I mean, you can put your county and, or size, you know, things like that, and
Cool.
I'd be glad to
I'm just
do
gonna make one point of commentary,
Mhm.
and you can disagree or not disagree. I just find it that the conversation around the mayor's salary is coming up when a woman is leaving. And I just want to acknowledge that.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I would say this is something we have discussed plenty
No,
of times
I
before, so-
understand that. I'm just saying that's a huge leap.
Yeah, no,
I'm
for sure
just,
is.
I'm just putting that out there.
Lindsay, I see your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to offer some support here. Jennifer Rambaldi from the UMass Collins Center actually reached out to me on January 29th, and they are currently doing a survey on mayor and city council salaries, including school committee right now.
Oh,
So I can reach out to her and ask her for the follow-up on those, but she did say she would hear back, I would hear back from her in the next several weeks about it. So this is actually something that's currently being reviewed by the Collins Center, and I will share whatever they share with me to the finance committee when it comes in.
Right. Yeah, and then I think the one other thing is, you know, Barb, you make a great point that there's also appointed officials. So I know like there's been some talk in the past about whether are there boards that should have some sort of stipend or something. And I don't personally feel like I necessarily have the perspective to know that, but it might be something that would be worth maybe, Barb, would you be opposed to just sort of reaching out to some of the committee chairs to just sort of say like, do you want to weigh in on this? Do you have an
Yeah,
opinion?
I mean,
or-
I think Dan did last time, and
yeah.
and they were like,
Yeah, I think the only ones that do get are the Board of Assessors
Mhm.
and the Board of Public Works.
Right.
Those are the only two that I'm aware of. Everybody else is.
Yeah,
I mean, the only ones that I can think of that really, I mean, the planning board maybe.
that's the one that I
I
always.
mean, even the zoning board only meets once a month, and they
Yeah.
don't meet every month. But otherwise, I think people go into these positions knowing they're volunteer.
Yeah, absolutely. The planning board is the one, just, you know, again, that just their workload last year was just absolutely intense. And I'm not saying they should get a pay, like they should get a stipend. I'm just sort of saying like, if our job here is to check in, it's just something that I feel is like,
Yeah.
I don't think it's necessarily a bad question to just say like, how are they feeling about this? I know that like, I mean, none of us do this for the pay, but it does for some people mean that they have to hire a sitter when they otherwise wouldn't have to. So, or for me, it often means ordering takeout when I might have otherwise cooked because I'm getting out of a meeting at 8:30 PM. So
I think for the majority of the boards, it would be strange.
yes,
I do, yeah, I would say it's very limited on the number of boards that
Yeah.
have so much, they
yeah.
do so much that it is worth getting.
I'll tell you what, I'll shoot an email over to Jesse on the planning board and just kind of be like,
Yeah,
do you want to weigh in on this? Like, I just want to give him an opportunity
Yeah,
if
that's
this
a
is
good
something that he has a feeling. And I'm not even saying that I'm in favor or against it. I just,
Yeah.
if this is something we're tasked with every 2 years, it seems worth just asking. So I can do that. Anything else on this topic? All right. Hadel, I had one question about sort of the report, and I was hoping that you could, I don't need like a fully cooked answer right now. It's just something that I kind of am curious about. And that's, it seems like there's certain items in the budget where we've halfway through the year already collected way more money than we budgeted for. And I've been around here long enough to know that some of those are items that's sort of a recurring trend, that there's these things that we set a very conservative, forecast for, and rightly so. And then it massively overperforms that expectation. And I guess what I'm wondering is, like, is there ever some thought with some of those when you get sort of this feedback of being like over 100% over what was of adjusting those forecasts in future years?
So the forecasting is based on what is the expense budget. So like for fiscal year 24, when I chose that, I was given the full budget for expenditure. For every dollar in the expense side, I need a dollar in the revenue side. Revenue side is a combination of 5 groups. One is the taxation, which is a standard calculation from the state. Second one is state aid. That's another thing which comes through the state budget to the cities and towns. The third section is other funding sources like enterprise, CPA, and all of those. And the fourth section is local receipts. And there's one more section, and I forget it right now, sorry. But so what I do when I do my calculation, I calculate everything which is obvious, which is like a standard formula. Whatever is not covered for the expenditure side. So let's say we have a $53 million budget, and I come up between all the other categories except local receipts, I come up with $50 million. So now I need $5 million in the receipt section.
Okay.
So what I do is normally when we have our meetings, city council, finance meetings are done in May. So I coordinate with treasurer's office and post everything as an actual. Sometimes we don't know what we're going to collect in the rest of the May and June. So I just take that number and assume that this is the only thing I'm going to get. And if it's over $5 million, then I can allocate in the respective categories. Whatever is extra turns out to be free cash. And because we've been doing the budget very conservatively, I had enough room from last 2 years or 3 years. We also had CARES and FEMA and ARPA funding from last couple of years,
For sure.
which is going to go, like CARES and FEMA is gone. ARPA is going to go away soon too.
Right.
So that you might not see this trend next year or the following year.
Right. All right. And I just want to be crystal clear about this. I'm not saying this in any way as any sort of critique. I'm simply just trying to make sure that I understand the procedures and how we're doing this. So there isn't, is there an effort? So basically, like, we're told this is what the city's going to cost. The operations of the city are going to cost next year. And then we create a revenue estimate based on hitting that number. But so is there a point is there any point in the process where we're trying to sort of ground truth, like, are these, what do we expect? What do we expect to get based on anything like?
So, for example, last year, what we have to do is, for enterprise fund,
Mhm.
we were short in the revenue.
Right.
So what I did is I coordinated with DOR, DLS people and say, I have a vote, there's going to be a potential increase in the water sewer fees. Can I use that as an offset? Because it was a different scenario. We didn't have enough room. We needed more room. We haven't collected because the state regulations states that whatever is actual collected on June 30th, that's what your actual revenue is.
Okay.
But we can't wait till tax rate recap in November to finalize our budget. Otherwise, we won't be able to operate the city starting July 1st. So I do my best estimate at that point to see where we would be. I always like to leave some cushion because you never know what's going to go wrong. Like sometimes state decides to cut in September that we are not going to give you this money. So what's going to happen? Where are they going to cover that? That means either you have an immediate layoffs or you have to cover that deficit from somewhere. And the first thing is going to come is put it on the taxpayers. And knock on wood, we are not at that point at this point.
Mhm.
I'm hoping to maintain this at least for next 2 years. But that's where this conservative approach comes because we really don't know what's going to happen in actual when the state releases their budget in September, October.
Yeah, totally understood. And I mean, I agree. I think that what the prudent thing to do, if we were sort of actually attempting to say, here's what we expect, would be to sort of figure out what's the range of realistic options and then assume like on the very low end of that realistic option, because, you know, then the worst case that happens is you have extra money.
Yeah.
I just, you know, sometimes we get to these budget meetings and there's things that are not, you know, funded in the budget that we, you know, expenses that we know are coming that aren't in the budget. And that, to me, that always just, it feels a little strange just as somebody who, like, a lot of my career is about, you know, trying to estimate what things are going to look like. It's like, you know, there was a couple years back where there was some like union incentives that we knew we were going to have to pay and we didn't have them in there. And it was like, well, but we all know we're going to make more than this. So,
Well, when that happened, what was the scenario? There were some exceptions given to the fee collection because of the COVID. Mayor decided to give break to the communities to help community. So they don't have to pay for like $30 sticker. They don't, if there are fees like $30, let's charge them $15. So there was a reduction. And as I said, we don't know when we do the actual budget in May. I really have to match dollar to dollar for expense and revenue as soon as the finance committee is done, because the next thing happens is it goes for the public hearing to the at the full council, and that's when we vote fully. So council cannot vote a budget if it's not a balanced budget, which is estimated revenue equals to estimated expenditures. So that scenario, we didn't know how much reduction in revenue is going to take place because we're trying to help community.
right.
But I don't think that happened after that. We've been increasing, like particularly this year, there is a range of fees are being increased, and we are looking into revenue projects for 5 years. So I think now it's not going to happen. It was just a one-time thing.
Okay. Beautiful. All right. Well, that's it for me. Do either of you have anything from that document? Anything that stood out? Or
Not at this time.
okay, great. Well, thank you so much for that, and thanks for this. This is super interesting. That's all I have. So unless you have anything else, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, motion second. All in favor?
Aye.
This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.